What's going on, guys? We're back here again. My name's Rain. We're here doing another how-to video. Today, probably the best day for this Honda Civic. We're going to do probably the best upgrade I've done to it. And I've done a B16 swap, and a manual swap. This might be better. I've had some stock suspension, and then I had coil sleeves. Yeah, they're not great. So, we got a nice hookup, and we're going to go coilovers today. It's exciting. Shout out to Yonaka and Street Imports Canada, hooking us up here, getting some sweet swag. Oh, there's more. That's awesome. We have a hardware bag. Ooh. Need some snips. Wow. It even gives you a little tutorial on the sticker as well. That's actually super helpful. That's awesome. That thing's gorgeous. Oh my god. That's super convenient. Cut out so you can actually pick this out. That's funny. These are gorgeous. So we went with the Yonaka Street spec coilovers for my sedan, since it's a sedan. But they do have some race series as well. They're a little stiffer spring rates. That's not what I was looking for, so here we are, street spec. So they give you the coilover adjustable wrenches here. A ton of adjustability here. This could be your little stopper, and these are your adjustment rings. And we're going to have our fronts and rears. The fronts are going to need a little bit of a... but I'll show you guys that when we're putting them in. These things are gorgeous. Everything's just in, like, this is amazing quality. So they knocked it out of the park with these. Pretty affordable too, actually. One of the more competitive ones out there on the market. And like I said, Street Imports, I got them within a week. So huge shout out to them. We're gonna go ahead and find the tools we're gonna need to throw these in. This is a one-person job. It's gonna be pretty straightforward. The hardest part about this is gonna be getting the adjustments correct all around. And there's gonna be a lot of fine-tuning, adjusting, getting your ride height perfect. So, I'm excited to see how these things ride. For nothing but good things about the coilovers, so swag, coilovers, goodies. Let's jump into tools you're going to need, and let's start throwing these bad boys in. Alright guys, so as far as putting the coilovers in, these are the tools you're going to need. You need a jack and jack stands. Now, I'd recommend getting a block of wood or something to chock the wheels as well. You're going to need some normal sockets, specifically 14, 17, and 19 millimeter, as well as a torque wrench and breaker bar. That's going to be for torquing your wheels and breaking the lug nuts loose. Then you're going to need a tape measure, possibly a paint pen or Sharpie to mark the coils so you know how far to extend them. You're going to need the spanner wrenches that come with your coil springs, some needle nose pliers, and those are going to be for the trunk lining push pins. And then an electric impact really makes it a lot easier. So we're going to go ahead, use these, and start slamming some coilovers in the Civic. Alright guys, so our first steps is going to be to lift the vehicle. Now you can either do one side at a time, or the front or the rear. I'm deciding to do the fronts, and then I'll do the rears after. So I lifted my front end, threw it on jack stands, and you're going to want to rip your wheels off. In my case, I have these coil sleeves that I installed about 6 months ago. And as you can tell, by the way that they're mushroomed out, they held up fantastically. So whether you're going from the factory suspension, or you already have coil sleeves or coilovers and you're just replacing them, it's going to be pretty much the same. As long as the front suspension is completely drooped, so you have the chassis of the car supported, but your suspension is in a resting position, then it's super straightforward. And what I like to do is remove this lower bolt for the strut assembly. That's going to be a 17 mil nut and bolt there, and that'll allow any of the tension, if there is any, it'll drop down maybe an inch or so. Then we can go ahead and remove this bolt here, is going to be a 14 mil, and usually, I think these forks are on backwards because usually this bolt is on the rear here, so I would have to swap sides, but let's not get too picky here. So we're going to undo this 14 millimeter bolt, and this will allow this bottom fork to drop off. Then we just have to go ahead and remove these upper two strut bolts here on the outside. These are going to be 14 mils. and we'll be able to drop the whole thing out the bottom. So I'll go ahead and throw you guys up here on a tripod, and we'll rip this strut out, and we gotta start taking measurements here, and we can start throwing in our new coilovers and start to adjust them and try and get our ride height kind of set. I like to take a hammer, watch your brake lines, give it a couple taps. She should walk right off. Then you can just compress. Slide your fork out. Then we just have to go up top, take off the upper nuts holding the strut assembly in. We can drop it out through the bottom. If you do have factory springs in here still, this is going to be a lot longer, so it may tend to fight you a bit more. It may not be that easy. You can use a jack and help compress this strut a bit just to get that fork out. Once you get the fork out, it's pretty straightforward at that point. And if all else fails and you're running into seized components, you can always pop a ball joint off, and that'll give you all the room in the world. And it's always best when you're up here taking these upper two nuts off to have your other hand underneath holding the strut. If you're in my case, you have to film. Just watch your toes. And boom. Now you do not have to hold on to these nuts as the new coilovers come with replacements. You just go ahead and throw these. And you can just go ahead and snake these struts out. And once we got our two halves out, we can head over to our coil springs and measuring tape. Start slamming her together. So at this point, what I like to do is put the fork back on the factory strut. Stick a tape measure on it. We're going to measure straight up to the bottom of this top pad here. Just looking at right about 23 5/8, 23 1/2. Now you have to keep in mind this has zero weight on the car, and especially these cheap eBay ones, the spring will compress quite a bit. So now we're gonna drop this down, take the fork off, put it onto our coilover, give us a rough measurement, and it'll give us kind of somewhere to start off with our ride height. We're gonna have our two wrenches here. Of course, the big one's gonna be for the upper rings, and the smaller one here is gonna be for the lock ring at the bottom. Now this gets a little confusing here, but when you're adjusting ride height, you do not want to be splitting these two upper rings here and adjusting these on your threads. That's going to be adjusting the compression of your spring, which will affect the actual handling of the vehicle. And these are set up from factory, so that's not necessary. When this is in the vehicle and you have your fork bolted into the chassis, we will be using your spanner on the upper ring here, but these two should be tightened together, so when you do that, you're actually just threading this in and out of this bottom body, and that will be adjusting your ride height. So it gets a little confusing, but I'll show you guys once it's in the vehicle. Now it is possible to spin this bottom body all the way off, and you want to make sure that you have a minimum thread engagement. And a good rule of thumb is about 1 inch, maybe 1.5 inches. So you don't want this on the bottom two threads, because obviously you can have a failure here. So you want to make sure it's engaged up at least a minimum amount. Now again, this doesn't need to be perfect. We just want to make sure we have proper thread engagement. And once you get this put on, you want to keep in mind wherever this lock ring is, that's going to be the maximum allowed length. So when you're in the vehicle adjusting, you know you can't go any further at this point. But what I like to do is throw your fork on, and then the same way we measured on the other strut, we're going to stand this up, and we're going to get an overall length, and we're going to try and match it up as close as possible. So these are going to be the new supplied nuts that come with the Yonaka Coilovers. And we're going to go ahead and assemble this the opposite of how we disassembled. So without our fork, we're going to thread this up from the bottom and slam our two nuts on the top. Then we're going to take our fork, slam it in place, and start throwing all the bolts back in. So you want to make sure that this bottom's out against the bottom of the body, and then this bolt is going to fit in this groove here through this bolt hole. Super important, you want to make sure it's on all the way. Go ahead and stick your bolt through. I like to support the fork while we tighten it up. And now at the bottom here, we can go ahead and we can align our bottom bolt hole. And again, depending on your ride height, you can use a jack, but it's loose enough you can use your knee here in this case. And in this case, we can go ahead and start tightening all the bolts up. So now all of our retaining bolts are tight, but we still have our loose lock ring here. And we're going to go ahead and throw our wheels on, and we're going to drop it down onto some ramps. We just put two bolts on the wheel just to hold it on. Tightened up all the coilover, all the suspension, everything we touched, and then I dropped it down on some ramps. Now ideally, to set ride height, you'd like to do it while it's on level ground, so ramps, not ideal, but it's what we're going to do. This work can become pretty tedious, and this is pretty much personal preference at this point. What I like to do is measure from a spot on my fender. I have a lot of nice scratches I can base off of, so I'm measuring the same spot each time. Then I'll measure straight down to the edge of the rim here. And then depending on how much you want, you just do some simple math. So right now, I'm pretty much at 5 inches. So I'll just knock it down an inch. So when I take the wheel off, I'll go in there and I'll measure an inch, and we'll drop it down, and hopefully that'll get us right where we want to be. I'll lift it up, tear it apart, and I'll show you guys how you can adjust your ride height here. So as far as adjusting the coilovers now, the one we're after is this lower lock ring here. So if we wanted to lower it an inch, we're going to move this ring up 1 inch. Once you have this at the height that you want, go ahead, take your large spanner wrench that they gave you. You're going to hook it onto the top one here, and you're going to tighten the entire assembly down, and it'll thread down into this body. And you have to watch out, because as you're turning, this can spin, and that will throw off your reading. So it might not be a bad idea to mark this, but again, measuring's your friend. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to drop this an inch, then we're going to move on to the rears. Oh, that's looking good. Ooh, I like that. Alright, so we are now moved on to the rear. We have the back in the air, sport on jack stands, wheels off. All the bolts back here are going to be 14 mil, so the two nuts at the top are 14. We're going to remove this bottom one here for the shock assembly. That's going to be a 14 as well. And with these aftermarket coil sleeves, I'm able to compress them enough to pull them out through here. However, if you have factory struts still, you may have to remove this 14 mil here, or the one back there. That way you'll be able to droop that control arm and slide her out. But for me, a little bit easier. So now we have our bottom loose. Just have to crawl inside the trunk and take the top two off. Alright, so we're just going to excuse this horrendous mess. So in the rear, we're going to have to remove our trunk liner. And we're going to have 3 push tabs. It's going to be one here, one up there, one down there. We can go ahead and peel this in. We're going to find our strut back there. So once again, we're just going to have our two 14 mil nuts. Go ahead and rip those off. Come down here and remove our strut. Easy as that. Now we're going to go ahead and measure between the two. We have to compress this once again, and then set up our new coil over to be the same height. I've already done the other side, so I'm just going to match this coil over to that side. And we can go ahead and throw it in the reverse of disassembly. Pretty easy once again. Back off our lock ring, extend the body out, measuring, make sure that we have the same length overall. We're going to go from the top of the top hat to the bottom of the bolt hole, and that'll give us our same overall length. So let's go ahead, I'll do that off camera and we can slam it in. Now we can go ahead and reassemble the bottom. And again, if you had to remove one of the other bolts, make sure they're tightened down. Go ahead and we're going to tighten down our lock ring here. Throw the wheels on, drop it down, and check our ride height. So we are a little bit higher in the rear than the front currently. I think I'm going to bring the front up. And I also do have a big old sub that's going to be going in here. So expecting that's going to crouch a bit more. And then when I do have passengers, hopefully that'll help level it out. So pretty happy with this. Now we're going to torque the wheels. Got to make sure you torque everything. Put our trunk back together, take her for a rip, and see how she goes. So I'm here with my little helper. We're doing a test drive. We're gonna kick the hell out of it on some gravel roads a bit, and then in a bit of farmer's field, perhaps. I'll do a review a little ways down the road, see how they're holding up, but honestly, for how they're doing on the roads, like, I can take corners pretty good, and we're testing out some good old gravel roads here and a little bit of off-roading, so they seem like the perfect mix. I love them so far. Like, best thing I've done to this car for sure. And I've done a V16 swap and a manual conversion at the same time, so these are fantastic. I love these things. So a few other things, I'd recommend leaving the spanner wrenches in the glove box or something in the car. That way I don't lose them, because I'm really good at that. And then you want to make sure that you tighten all the bolts and torque your wheels, and then after a couple days of driving or whatever, just go ahead and retorque all the bolts. Honestly, fantastic. 100% recommend these things. They're beasts. They look cool too. So shout out again to Yonaka and Street Imports, hooking me up. Got these parts like within a week, even with the end of the world going on. So huge shout out to them. I thank you guys so much, and highly recommend these parts. Coilovers so far, probably the best parts. Those motor mounts pretty cool, but coilovers, hands down best parts. So see you guys in the next one. I hope this helps.